Hello, and welcome to the Great Women in Compliance podcast with Hemma and Lisa Fine, sponsored by Corporate Compliance Insight. Today, I'm joined by our guest co-host, Ellen Hunt, and we're going to be talking about some of the new developments regarding AI and privacy, with a focus on how ethics and compliance professionals get their head around all of the different requirements to identify and manage the risks in a practical way. So we are so excited that we have two experts with us today to share their wisdom and advice with you all. First, I want to introduce Jean Liu, who's former Vice President, Chief Legal, Privacy and Compliance Officer for Nuance Communications, and currently Microsoft Assistant General Counsel and RIPA Officer. And secondly, we've got my friend here and former colleague from Snap, the parent company of Snapchat, Hope Anderson. There she led the global privacy and product function, but she is now a partner with the global law firm White & Case, and she specializes there in privacy, product, and AI. So let me turn to Jean first. Jean, welcome. Please introduce yourself. Our listeners would love to hear a bit about your illustrious career.
Thank you so much for having me. And it's so wonderful to be here with my new friend, Hemma and Hope, as well as Ellen. And Ellen and I go back quite a few years. So it's wonderful to join you on this podcast. So I started my compliance journey with implementing HIPAA when it was first enacted. This is quite a few years ago. And before HIPAA, which, changed the landscape of the way in which we managed, handled data of our particular clients at the time, people thought, it was no big deal. It was going to pass. It'll pass. It's fine. But now, 30 years later, we see that it's really the mother of U.S. privacy laws, one of the few federal privacy laws. And now with so many states coming online with the new wave of AI regulations, I am so grateful that I've had the experience working in HIPAA compliance and really making it up as I went along when I first started, to be perfectly honest, because I feel like it's given me the background and the confidence to be able to tackle this new AI. What is this new AI? How do we implement compliance guidelines around all of the wonderful things that AI will bring us? So I've had a lot of different industries in my career, and most recently serving as Chief Legal, Privacy and Compliance Officer of a mid-sized tech company that was then acquired by Microsoft. I think my background and experience really helps me bring some skill sets to Microsoft from all the things that I've learned along the way in my journey.
Oh, I love that. Thank you so much. We can't wait to get stuck in with you on some of those experiences. But before we do that, let me introduce Hope. Hope, you've also had a fabulous and inspiring journey, I think, from big law to private practice, eBay, Snap, and then back to big law. So please give us the highlights. Introduce yourself.
Yes, thank you. Great to be here. Thanks so much for having me. And I do think it's a bit of an interesting journey. You don't always hear the big law in-house and then back to big law. But I think the unifying thread throughout my career has been finding interesting work and following that as it has evolved. And within the privacy space, it has evolved so significantly. So close to 20 years ago when I was starting out, especially in the US, the privacy landscape was so different. I remember getting trained and told, you can basically do what you want in the US so long as you write it in your privacy policy. To then the huge shifts that we've had, and rolling out GDPR at Snap was really instrumental in learning all of the nuts and bolts of rolling out compliance, which was then a great building block for us to add in state privacy. And now we have seen that really expand. And as we'll get into more, that may be going the same route with AI. So I think having those experiences to layer on top are really helpful.
This is great to have both of you with us today. When I think of the complexity around privacy and AI, I get this picture in my head of that, those big balls made of rubber bands, how they twist and turn and wrap around each other, and they're all interconnected. And for somebody who doesn't grapple with it every day like you do, you're steeped in it, you're the experts. How would you advise people to get knowledgeable about the topics? Because I think these are two topics that every compliance officer has to be knowledgeable about. Hope, your thoughts?
Yeah, I actually think to start, I would try to narrow the focus. As I talk about AI, I like to liken it to the internet. And when the internet started, it's everywhere and means everything. And if you try to do it all, it's too overwhelming. So I would pick some basics on the technology. Again, I don't think you need to learn everything about neural networks and how all of the tech works, but I would understand some of the key concepts and understand the importance of generative AI that is relatively new, and that's really around, in its simplest form, just creating new novel content. And then maybe pick an area within AI and privacy that kind of touches on what you're working on, and focus on that. I think there's lots of resources. A lot of law firms provide free resources that, in case we just put out a AI tracker that gives a global overview of different laws in different areas. Break off these bite-sized pieces and build from there is my advice.
And Jean, would you do it bite-sized, or would you eat the whole Big Mac?
I love that analogy. I work at a company that brought the world Copilot. Everything that Microsoft does is big and just at scale. So from a company culture perspective, we at Microsoft definitely take a look at the whole picture. But that doesn't mean that each one of us individually or each one of us in our individual departments doesn't have our own focus areas. So working in the privacy office for Microsoft, the global privacy officer, I reported to the global chief privacy officer. And in that function, we have to think carefully about all of the different risks, rewards, ways in which, the company can continue to thrive, but in a way that's flexible and with the right level of governance. And so fortunately, we at Microsoft have a lot of resources, and we have an Office of Responsible AI. This office have promulgated, so this is company policy, but it's really the law of the company, a responsible AI framework for all of us to think about AI in the way that we go about our work every day. Uniquely, privacy and AI are inextricably combined because you can't have AI without data. And if you're talking about regulated or sensitive data, then certain protections need to be put around that data so that it is used in a way that is contemplated by the data owner. So whether that be specifically the data subject, if you're talking about GDPR, or the patient, when you talk about PHI. And I think Microsoft does a really great job at making sure that we've got the gates put in place, that we have these discussions and we talk about how to tackle each one of these various areas. Because I can definitely tell you, even from my experience at Nuance, healthcare organizations need AI. They are strapped. They don't have the resources, the staffing to do everything that's necessary in order to give the highest level of modern healthcare that we as patients demand. And so in order to help alleviate some of that administrative burden, operational burdens, AI is a perfect way to do that. And so we want to try to help those customers, and they want the help. Putting together a framework to start, I think, is helpful.
And Hemma, what about you? Do you have any work-related examples you can share in the AI privacy world?
So timely, because I've just inherited privacy as part of my compliance function, and I'm not a privacy expert by any means or an AI expert. That said, my expertise is normally derived by the smart people that I surround myself with. So number one piece of advice, surround yourself by smart people like Jean and Hope. Follow them on LinkedIn, follow their publications, their writing, because it really can help you focus the mind. And I did want to double down on that focus piece. What we're trying to do, at least what I try to do, is remember the basic principles, follow the opportunity, be excited about the opportunity, mitigate the risk, and as Jean said so beautifully, put the governance and frameworks around it. And so rather than being overwhelmed, I try to look at what my company is wanting to do, what they're excited about, what my function wants to do, what they're excited about. then do the objective-centered risk assessment around that. I find that much more fun for me. And also it saves us from being in the office of no. Oh, it's risky. Just do less. We don't want to be too conservative. I read stories about when email first came out. Gosh. And I remember doing work with that email. I am that old. And law firms were like, must not use email. And we don't want to be that person right now. We don't want people saying that about the lawyers in 10, 20 years' time about AI. I think we need to really lean into the exciting opportunities and remember our basic role, which is unlock those opportunities by mitigating risk and governance. And then one quick anecdote I'll say to you, information is everywhere, and it can be overwhelming. But I was on a flight back on the Alaska airline flight from San Francisco yesterday. And after I'd watched my movie, I had about 30 minutes left. What could I watch? They had AI shorts right there for me to watch during my flight. And I learned a ton. So find a moment, do the focus stuff, but also it's out there. There's a lot of information. Dare I say AI can probably answer your questions on AI. You heed the warning. But yeah, I appreciate the question. It can be overwhelming, especially, again, someone in my position inheriting the thing. But we're not alone, and don't be afraid of it, I guess is my advice for that. Yeah. And, we've seen a lot of companies publishing with great fanfare their AI positioning, their governing principles, the frameworks like Jean referenced, maybe more so than even policies and procedures right now. And so with I've come out of the ESG world with greenwashing. I'm very conscious about AI washing. I'd love to know what your thoughts are on this approach, this AI principles rather than policies piece. Jean, let me ask you to comment on that. What's your company doing? What do you think? Microsoft's obviously doing what they're doing. You explained it, but what do you think about that approach, the principles versus policies?
It depends on your organization, right? I think if you've got a very diverse organization that's operating in all over the world or in various countries, let's say, you really have to start with a framework. And, the Microsoft Responsible AI framework is published publicly, so people can take a look at that and see how it's organized. But from that framework is where then you, as either an individual contributor or a leader of a particular business unit, let's say privacy, can really start to frame up what are the policies that are necessary? What are the procedures that are necessary? And what do these things need to say? So from a governance perspective, the way I see it working in an organization that has diverse voices, diverse products, diverse customers, is starting at that framework level and then working down each avenue of the industry, the region or country or particular legal requirement. And in that way, you are assured that at least at a top level, an all up level, you've got the right thought and the right ethos to go forward. And that you set that as your bar, and everybody else can start working on the details around how do we implement, right? So after you have policies and then you have procedures, you have implementation, you have assessment thereafter, and then you have potentially an audit. I don't know that it's an area that's mature enough for auditing, but I do certainly think that doing a periodic assessment of how your implementation is going is a good thing to do, because that will help you calibrate against that framework. It calibrates against what is the ethos, right? And making sure that each step of the way, as you're building out policies and procedures, they are speaking to the things that your organization and really society cares about, right? So bias, discrimination, and those type of things we want to try to avoid.
That's so important, Jean, because I think to myself, if you put policies and procedures in place immediately, you can set your company up to fail on day two, right? Because you haven't implemented them, you haven't socialized them. So I'm really liking this principle-based approach, the framework where we rely on those principles to then see what's feasible. And if I'm not mistaken, Hope, data protection and privacy is based on very clear principles. So there's lots to be learned there. Am I correct?
Yes, absolutely. And I completely agree. I really liked the principles-based approach. I see a lot of my clients trying to wrap their heads around AI, both the technology and the laws coming out, and both highly sophisticated clients building models to perhaps less technological savvy companies just trying to implement AI within their organization. And both kind of need something to guide towards to start and have these high level principles. 100% it will need to be followed by the policy, the procedure, and implementation. But we learned a lot about that exactly through privacy and rollout of GDPR. You need to really align. And I have found, and certainly at Snap, when you have these principles, we would put out our principles internally, even if the employees can't understand each or have time to know every single policy and procedure. If you get a grasp of the core principles, you'll be going in the right direction, and then you can ask for clarification as you need it.
So true. And then what are your thoughts on this? I know you do a lot of consulting work and your clients are asking you to help them, start on this. How do you advise them when it comes to principles versus policies and procedures?
Yeah. I think it's the next evolution, right? I mean, we've gone kind of from rules-based to ethics-based and utilizing behavioral science. And the truth is you cannot figure out every situation an employee or the people they interact with are going to be in. So let's treat humans like humans and give them the tools they need by setting the expectations of what is permissible and what are the things you can't do. So I think it's the next evolution for effective compliance programs, really, because we have to get beyond publishing 30-page, policies nobody reads. And particularly in this area where AI is something that people are trying to understand. It's evolving itself. It's changing. Its uses are multiplying. All of that, I think, is really, as Jean said, the framework. Everybody can attach to a framework, right? It's the ladder. It's the structure. And if you can understand that, then you've got some good guardrails on what you should or shouldn't do. And I think, frankly, it's the next level of maturity.
Ellen, it's talking about setting up decision-making frameworks, isn't it? Guidance for that. So yeah, thank you for highlighting that.
Yeah, exactly. And, one of the things that I think about is as this evolves, and you've both have alluded to this in your, talking about your career paths, right? We always kind of build on what's happened in the past. And I just wonder if AI is going to take a similar path and that we think of privacy as a right. And do you think that, the use of AI for consumers could become a human right? And what I mean by that is, will I have the right to say in my healthcare setting or in a financial transaction setting, whether it's my bank or my credit card or my investments or others, to say the decisions that are getting made about me, whether I'm going to be granted a treatment plan or denied a treatment plan, or I'm going to get a loan or not get a loan, or access to capital or whatever. What do you think it will evolve that I can opt out? Just let's kind of crystal ball it. And where do you think the next kind of ideation of this is going to go? Hope?
We're certainly seeing that, and there's already a structure and really along the language of with respect to consequential decisions. And I think the challenge really that we're seeing already that we will continue to see is what is the definition of AI? What is the definition of a consequential decision? What falls into that bucket? We're certainly seeing certain areas emerge, as you mentioned, healthcare, insurance, employment. There may be more, but I think understanding those details is really going to be important. And I do think we're a long way off from that. And we're seeing that with approaches already. I think with privacy, we really had such a strong foundation from Europe for so long that the world was able to look to Europe. And we're certainly seeing Europe look to lead with the EU AI Act, but not everyone else is taking these same approaches. In the US, we're seeing a bit more of guardrails, but a focus on innovation and not stifling the innovation. It's certainly right, and having control over these important decisions will be important, but I don't know that it will be as clear of a path as we've had with privacy.
Jean, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with what Hope was saying around it's less concrete, right? AI is less concrete because it's something that we as non-engineers really, it's very difficult to grasp. It's very difficult to understand, and we don't need to understand it all, but just to know that we don't understand. And because of that, I think there is a certain level of caution with regard to the use of AI systems. So to go back to your question, Ellen, do I think in the future that people can opt out? I don't. I don't see that as a future for us. And the reason is because there's just going to be a time and place where it is how everything works. It would be like, I suppose, opting out of the internet. It is possible, but then you don't live in modern day society. And so you would have to make quite a harsh decision about how you were going to live your life in order to opt out of AI. And I think the lawmakers, at least in the US, are seeing this, and also in Europe with the EU AI Act, right? But Colorado being the first state that has passed a US state-based AI law, right? They have transparency of the way in which, your data is used and if you don't want it to be used. And then consequential decision, right? So if there's a consequential decision, there is an opportunity for you to get an explanation of why that decision was made. And I think it goes back to this whole concept of human in the loop. So from what we don't know, that we know, right? Humans have to have that opportunity to intercede. And if a human is interceding because there's, whatever you may call an explanation or a potential appeal of a decision that was consequential in either healthcare or finance, which are some of the big areas where people have concern, I think that will not only allay some of the fears, but also make the AI system itself better. And I think that's ultimately the goal for all companies who are looking to use AI or starting to use AI, which is to always have that AI do what you want it to do and not what you don't want it to do, right? The human in the loop is, I think, a really important concept.
Yeah. Hemma, what do you think?
So much to say on this one. I love this topic. Human rights is very dear to me, but what does that actually mean in the context of this? It means the balancing of the individual right versus the collective good, right? And so if we assume for a second there's a potential for massive collective good when it comes to AI, how are we making sure we, by design and by use, we think of the human right as well? And funnily enough, I think it goes back to what Hope and Jean have said in its principles again. I mean, we need to make sure we've got the human in the loop. We also need to make sure we're thinking about design and uses. Again, not out of a place of fear, but out of a place of unlocking an opportunity responsibly. So I think of it responsible growth when it comes to AI. And then I think, looking over the AI Act in the EU, they've got 6 principles, and they're very much what the ladies have been saying here today. You've got human agency and oversight and the ability for a human to override a decision. You've got safety, privacy and data governance. Obviously, we've been talking about transparency, diversity, non-discrimination and fairness in the design, and then making sure we've got social and environmental well-being. So I love that. Again, the thought leadership there is get the principles in mind. And I'll give you what we did at Zendesk is we didn't want to go the route of don't use the AI. We sell the AI. We wanted to make sure we were getting some innovation there and everyone learning it. So after the case, I think it was a Samsung case, I'm not sure, where there was some data leaked and everyone was starting to get worried about what could be put into the AI that was, proprietary or confidential. We decided we just needed to put some principles in. So the first thing we did was ethical AI by design for our engineers. The second thing we did was responsible use for our employees. And then we'll iterate, as we said. Again, I go back to what we said earlier. You don't want to be in fear and squash the opportunity. You want to unlock the opportunity responsibly. And so I think it's a very important question you asked. It allows us not to talk about the dinosaur that doesn't want to go with the times. It actually allows them to engage in the debate because they're not saying they don't want to go with the times. They're just calling out red flag. Let's be responsible and avoid inadvertent consequences of this magnificent opportunity that I think is undeniable. To your point, Jean, we're not going to be able to avoid it. Just like the internet. I call it the internet, the web and the AI are the thing. And so we're going to have to go with it responsibly. And I love that we, those of us in this call and our listeners are going to be able to have a pivotal role there. We can apply these principles. So I get excited about it. Now, gosh. And the other thing, we talked about the AI law, but what about the US law, the US AI law?
I hope we have a more unified approach, right? Like companies who are putting the framework and the principles together. I think it's difficult to have multiple different state laws and it's not impossible. People do it, obviously. There are companies who operate in the US and all around the world. It's possible. But as I think our world becomes more and more connected, and we begin to have expectations as humans, or think of them as human rights, that I have a right to privacy, I have a right to understand when AI is being used, and to maybe have, be in the loop, the human in the loop, as Jean says. I think I'm hopeful there will be some consolidation, because I'm not sure we really have to have a whole bunch of different standards because I happen to be in Nebraska instead of North Carolina or whatever it is. I think that makes it more difficult for business to be efficient and effective. I know other people can have different opinions about that, but when you think about all of the different state laws and all that, are you hopeful we'll ever get a federal privacy law? And do you think we'll have a US AI law?
It's so interesting, especially in the context of where we are right now with a new federal bill having recently been proposed, the American Privacy Rights Act. When it first came out, so I would say, to set the stage, at the beginning of this year, I would have said no, certainly no time soon do I think we're going to have a federal privacy act. Then this bill came out with bipartisan support and a lot of enthusiasm, and we saw lawmakers get excited about it, and it felt like maybe we do have the momentum to get this across. Then, of course, now as it goes on and we get into the details, there's some very difficult pieces that are hard on each side. And as we kind of debate, it feels to me the likelihood is going down, and states aren't willing to wait. As Jean mentioned, with Colorado being the first state to come in with a comprehensive AI law, we have many bills, over a dozen in California, that seem likely to pass. It does feel to me like we're going the way of state laws here. Do I hope that someday we can and would get a federal bill? Certainly. But then also, once we have the state ones, it's very hard because each state gets attached to their own version, and that makes the federal negotiations more difficult.
Jean, what does your crystal ball say?
Yeah, I mean, hate to sound like a downer, but I feel like, the horse has left the barn at this point, the train has left the station, because we have not seen any real significant movement on the federal side for an AI law, let alone a privacy one. The privacy laws in the states have been around for decades.
Yeah.
And now that we see the states starting to move because they don't want to wait, and they shouldn't, I don't really see an opportunity for the federal government to come in and put a comprehensive AI law on the books, which is really unfortunate because, as you said, Ellen, I should have the same expectation if I go from here to this other state, from this other state to yet another, right? And that's really also not how AI systems work. It is very difficult to just set up state boundaries for algorithms to work differently in one state versus another state. It might actually be impossible.
Absolutely.
Some baseline standard. I don't know how it's going to work.
All right. Hemma, you want to bring us to a close?
I really don't, because I've got so many ones that I'd love to talk to these people about, but I know we could talk all day about this. Close to my heart are the things like leveraging AI for ethics and compliance, but I'll have to get back to you on that one. Very much on my mind. I'm sure it's very much on the mind of our listeners. And so I guess, as sad as I am to close us out today, I wanted to just ask you one final question. This is going to be a hot topic for ethics and compliance professionals for some time to come. We know that, and it will continue to evolve. So would you be able to share with us at least one resource that you found to be invaluable in helping you keep up with all that is happening, and that will help our listeners as they start to think about how they can leverage AI for their own functions, but also for their business partners? Jean, let me turn to you.
I will actually give you two. The organization that I find very helpful and I visit their website daily is the IAPP, the International Association of Privacy Professionals, which they've just recently actually launched a certification program for AI compliance professionals. And then the other organization that I absolutely love is the Future of Privacy Forum. Similarly, they have launched their AI series and they have great materials and lectures. So those two would be my go-tos.
Very nice. Hope, what about you?
Those were my same two. I'm on the advisory board of both, so I'm glad that Jean said it. Then it doesn't even sound like a conflict, but they're really fantastic resources and complement each other nicely. The only other piece that I would add is less of a resource, but just to be sure that you are using AI. So get Copilot, get ChatGPT, make sure, and I talk to my parents about this, or, other lawyers that aren't in the tech space. Start using it in some way so that you're understanding what you're advising on. It really makes a big difference.
So smart and so right. I'll give a tip. I used it to bring my code of conduct from a 12th grade reading level down to a 10th grade reading level. There's all sorts of things you can do, practical things you can do. So speaking of practical, thank you for the practical advice. Thank you for the tips. I feel smarter, as always, when speaking with you and inspired. Thank you for taking the time to talk with us and the GWIP community. And thank you to the GWIP community for listening in. If this discussion has inspired you like it has me, please share it with someone. Take advantage of the LinkedIn GWIP group to learn more. Reach out to Jean and Hope on LinkedIn. I'm sure they would be grateful for that. And let us know about any more topics that interest you. And with that, thank you to our sponsors and our host. And we'll see you again soon.
Thank you very much for having me.